Have you ever wished someone would die, or that person who annoyed you would just go away, never to be seen again? Or maybe it's something more like when your enemy is struggling and it brings you joy, like when your rival loses, or when the guy who cut you off ends up getting in a wreck, or when the bully gets bullied. Well, that's not the heart of God. The heart of God is mercy and reconciliation. God desires that we love our enemies, that we bless those who curse us, and not to think as the world does, and thinking with revenge and thinking of someone else's misfortune, even if that someone has caused us misfortune. And if we look at the life of Job, in my last video, I talked about how Job made a covenant with his eyes. And I connected it with the helmet of salvation, how I see the helmet of salvation having this guard that comes down over our eyes and our mouth to give us a perspective in what we see that is pure and righteous, and seeing the world from a godly worldview in a Christ-like way. And this time I want to talk about the mouth and how we can speak curses over our enemies. And that's in Job 31, verses 29 and 30. And I want to read that. Have I rejoiced over my enemy's distress, or become excited when trouble came his way? I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for his life with a curse. So before, Job made a covenant with his eyes, and now we see he's not allowing his mouth to curse. And this is reflective of Jesus. And Jesus is one who did not allow himself to curse his enemies. He spoke of curses that many of his enemies brought on themselves, but Jesus became a curse for us. He became a curse for his enemies, and we are counted as his enemies before we are born again. Aren't you glad that Jesus blessed his enemies? Because he died for us while we were still sinners. We don't stop sinning to then be saved. It's our salvation that leads us to a life of sanctification that will eventually be a glorified life where we are no longer in sin. We're in eternity with him apart from sin. But before, we are enemies. And so Jesus shows us his mercy. He reconciles us. He comes to bless us. So what I want you to do today, I just kind of have a short message, a challenge. Think about someone who's an enemy of yours and pray for reconciliation. Think about someone that you have wronged in some way because they were your enemy. Someone who you rejoiced over their misfortune. Someone who lost and you celebrated because they were your rival. Think about that person and pray for how you can be reconciled to them. Even if it's just forgiving them in your heart, that you may not have a relationship or connection with them anymore. And it may be someone that you don't have a relationship with. It could be a politician that you disagree with on every level. How can you bless and pray for that person? Whoever it may be that you see as your enemy or that you desire for misfortune, first pray for yourself to be changed in that by God's grace, and then pray for reconciliation. Think of ways that you can bless that person in some way. Bless those who curse you, or bless those who disagree with you and you see it as a curse. And I just think about, while we're in this time of isolation, it could be that person that just annoys you and you're glad to be isolated from them. But what about when we come back together? Have you guys seen some of the videos and some of the news about people just hating one another as they come out of isolation? We need to deal with our issues now so that when we do come back together, when we are restored physically, that we will be prepared spiritually in our relationship with God to restore those relationships, to not just get annoyed with each other, but to remain patient and loving and kind. I want you to read something. I want you to read Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 36, and let that inform the way that you speak and act towards others, now and when we come back together. I also want you to put on the helmet of salvation, because our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against our enemies in this world. It's against the enemies of the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And so when we put on that helmet of salvation to guard our minds, to give us pure vision, not in lust and greed and judgment, but to see others the way Christ sees them, and to speak words of blessing. So see the world as Christ does, bless others with the blessings of Jesus, and go forth fighting the battle against our true enemy.